Reports have emerged recently, General, that members of the special counsel's team are frustrated at some level with the limited information included in your March 24th letter, that it does not adequately or accurately necessarily portray the report's findings. Do you know what they're referencing with that?
No, I don't.
And of course, right there, according to tonight's breaking news, the Attorney General did know about Robert Mueller's frustration. Over time, as the New York Times pointed out, Bill Barr's assessment of Mueller's investigation seemed to change. They pointed to this exchange with Barr during his confirmation hearing back in January.
Do you believe Mr. Mueller would be involved in a witch hunt against anybody?
I don't believe Mr. Mueller would be involved in a witch hunt.
Well, those comments now stand in sharp contrast to what Barr would go on to say this month.
Do you believe that the investigation that Director Mueller undertook was a witch hunt or illegal, as been asserted by the president?
As I said during my confirmation, it really depends on where you're sitting. If you are somebody who is being falsely accused of something, you would tend to view the investigation as
well. You're sitting.
You would not be alone for asking what's going on here. And with us for more, two people who know a thing or two because they've seen a thing or two in this area. Sam Stein, politics editor for the Daily Beast, and Katie Benner, Justice Department reporter for the New York Times. So, Sam, talk about your reporting tonight. What is or was Mueller prepared to say? What was Justice trying to do to him, if anything, to prevent him from testifying?
So our reporting is a little bit limited on that first front. What we know is that Mueller had given indications to people on the Hill that he was ready to testify about his report. We don't know if it was going to be a public testimony, a private testimony, or the length or contours of what kind of hearing it could be, but the indications were given. And then subsequently, what we're reporting tonight is that the Department of Justice has dragged its feet on scheduling such a hearing or a testimony, citing the fact that as special counsel, Robert Mueller continues to be an employee of the Justice Department. And so there is a mounting sense of frustration on the Hill that the star witness, the literal author of the Mueller report, can't be brought up yet to answer questions, even as there is mounting misinformation, confusion with what is actually portrayed in his report and how he, Mr. Mueller, related it to Attorney General Bill Barr.
Second question, Sam, can anyone prevent Robert fill-in-the-blank Mueller,
That's a good
Bronze
question.
Star recipient, Marine combat captain in the Vietnam War, from testifying before Congress?
So that is a good question. I'm not a lawyer. And also, Mr. Mueller will not remain a employee of the Justice Department forever. So the likelihood that he will testify before Congress is exceedingly high. It's just a question of how much tension will there be between the administration in when it happens and what he's allowed to say, and whether or not he ends up just taking matters into his own hands. But I believe that tonight's episode, in which it was strategically, I believe, let out there that he was dissatisfied with Bill Barr's summary of his findings, really reflects a sense of frustration, not just from Democrats, but from people on Mueller's team, that he has had to have watched other people talk about what he's produced and been silent himself. And you get the sense that that will soon change.
Katie, I'm going to play an exchange with Barr at the hearing about the letter he wrote, and then I'm going to ask you when we come back what makes it notable. Here it is.
The letter of the 24th, Mr. Mueller's team did not play a role in drafting that document, although we offered him the opportunity to review it before we sent it out, and he declined that.
So, Katie, why is that notable, knowing what we know tonight?
Sure, it becomes part of a pattern for Bill Barr of not lying per se, but omitting extraordinarily important details such that the public is misled and a narrative hardens. So when he said that the Mueller team didn't want to see the draft of the 4-page letter, in large part that was to make people feel confident that Bob Mueller had confidence in him, that they trusted his judgment, and that there were no objections to that 4-page letter. What we discover tonight, thanks to reporting, is that in fact there were objections to the letter, and he knew that at the time that he gave the testimony, and yet just omitted that inconvenient fact. We've seen it happen again and again, even in his response to the reporting about this letter and Mueller's discontent. You know, Bob Mueller said the words, the content, the nature, the characterization is off. And Barr's response is, but he didn't technically say that I was, I'm looking now, he didn't technically say that I was inaccurate. So he's relying on a very, very narrow point in order to try to ignore the larger issue. And we've seen this again and again.
Sam, what people are reacting to in part, his confirmation hearing, the portrait he painted for himself was a guy who had really been looking forward to going to Florida or wherever, enjoying retirement. He mentioned his age. He introduced his family. The portrait being painted tonight is of a cagey, inside, bare-knuckle political operator and pro-Trump attorney general who is playing to an audience of one despite having the United States as a client. What is tomorrow's hearing going to be like, you think? 3 of those Democrats are candidates for president.
Well, it's going to be messy. It's going to be emotional. People are going to be upset with what is a consistent misrepresentation of information that he had sole or near sole possession of, and highly sensitive public information at that point, too. And so, yeah, I expect it to be very contentious. And I do expect Bill Barr to mount a defense that is essentially quibbling with words, saying, I didn't misrepresent anything. It was none of this was inaccurate. It's just they were worried about the public portrayal. That seems to be the defense that his team has foreshadowed tonight. But yeah, Brian, you're absolutely right. Keep in mind the context of the confirmation hearing was deep concern over the interim appointment of Matt Whitaker, the possibility that a true Trump ally, someone who was a sycophant, would be put in this position and basically end the probe. And Bill Barr gets put out there, presented as someone who actually could land the plane, to borrow a phrase, and do so admirably. And what we've found out is that every step along the way, he has made a choice that has been highly controversial, if not downright misleading, and he's going to have to answer for that tomorrow.
So, Katie, how do we now think about Thursday, Democratic-controlled House of Representatives, Judiciary Committee? Everyone's acting like staff have never asked questions before. Of course, it's been a tradition. Ask Fred Thompson, Sam Dash, who made their bones at the Watergate hearings as staff counsel. So do you think, I guess this calls for an opinion, we will see Barr before House Judiciary on Thursday?
Well, sure. I'd love to address that question. I mean, Jerry Nadler's gambit was, we're going to force Barr to do something that could also set a precedent so we can continue to use House counsel in questions going forward around the Mueller report. Now, Nadler can do that, and he can fight it, and he can subpoena Barr, and Barr cannot show up on Thursday. But in doing so, Chairman Nadler would lose an extraordinary opportunity to press Barr in the moment when he is at a disadvantage, when public opinion is turning against him, and when Nadler would have a rhetorical advantage. So to lose that opportunity could be huge. And so does Nadler really want to make the calculation, I'm going to subpoena Barr and fight this, and then maybe ask him questions about this matter weeks or months from now when people aren't paying attention or don't care? I think there is a chance that we could see Nadler change course, and I think that he could use the breaking news tonight and say, you know what, the situation has changed. It is essential that we get him before the committee right now in a timely fashion. And then in addition to what Sam was saying about how messy it's going to be, we also need to step back and take a look at what Barr represented, not just in terms of integrity and restoration of integrity to the department. He represents a sort of a turning point in the course of the presidency. We have a president, President Trump, who is changing what it means to be president of the United States. He is busting through norms. And right now it looks like he has an attorney general who's inclined to help him do that. And that, you know, If that is the case, we could be in for a very long 2 years, and the office of the presidency itself could be completely transformed by the time we get to 2020.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.